"Women like you don't belong here," Diana Blackwell said to me on my first day at Meridian Financial. She was the senior vice president. I was a junior analyst fresh out of business school. 2 years later, she was cleaning my office as part of the janitorial crew after being fired for embezzlement, when I discovered what she'd been doing and how she'd been using me as a scapegoat. I realized that sometimes the people who try to keep you down are the ones with the most to hide. This is the story of how I went from being told I didn't belong to running the department that once rejected me. It was September 15, 2019, and I was 32 years old. Finally ready to prove myself in corporate finance, after years of grinding it out at smaller firms in Bellingham, I'd landed what felt like my dream job at Meridian Financial in downtown Seattle. The glass towers reflecting Puget Sound, the marble lobbies that echoed with the clicking of designer heels. The electric energy of deals worth millions flowing through those corridors. This was where I belonged, or at least, where I desperately wanted to belong. My name is Rebecca Torres, though everyone calls me Becca. I'd worked my way up the hard way, and I mean the really hard way. Community college in Yakima while living in my beat-up Honda Civic for 3 months when I couldn't make rent. Then, Washington State University, where I worked nights at a 24-hour diner called Mel's on the edge of campus, serving coffee and pancakes to drunk college kids who had no idea their waitress was studying Finnan. See all modeling between orders. The MBA program at University of Washington took me 4 years instead of the typical 2 because I couldn't afford to quit my day job at a small accounting firm in Tacoma, while my classmates were doing unpaid internships at prestigious companies. I was reconciling books for local restaurants and auto shops, saving every penny for tuition. But I graduated debt-free with a 3.9 GPA and a hunger to succeed that could power a small city. My apartment in Capitol Hill was a showbox studio that cost more than my parents' mortgage back in Spokane. But it was mine. The walls were covered with financial newspapers, market analysis printouts, and a vision board I'd made during a particularly optimistic weekend. Right in the center was a picture of the Meridian Financial building, a sleek 52-story monument to success that I'd walked past dozens of times. Imagining myself riding those elevators to meetings that mattered, the night before my first day. I could barely sleep. I'd prepared for weeks, studying every deal Meridian had closed in the past 5 years, memorizing the leadership team's backgrounds, even researching the building's architecture so I could make small talk in the elevator. My best suit, a charcoal gray Nordstrom number that I'd saved 3 months to buy, hung on my closet door like a superhero costume. Black pumps that were just high enough to command respect but not so high that I'd wobble during presentations. A leather portfolio that was actually pleather but looked expensive enough to fool anyone who didn't inspect it too closely. I set for different alarms and woke up 2 hours before the first one went off. The Meridian Financial building at 1847 4th Avenue was everything I'd imagined and more. 52 floors of gleaming steel and glass that seemed to scrape the Seattle sky, with the company logo etched in gold letters across the entrance. The lobby was a cathedral of capitalism, 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors that reflected the morning light, and a massive fountain in the center that somehow made the sound of falling water feel like money being counted. I walked through those revolving doors at exactly 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early but not so early that I'd look desperate. My heels clicked against the marble in a rhythm that I hoped sounded confident rather than nervous. The security desk was staffed by a woman named Carol who had kind eyes and a smile that made me feel slightly less like an imposter. First day, she asked as she printed my temporary badge, "Is it that obvious?" I laughed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Honey, I've been here 12 years. I can spot first-day energy from across the lobby. You'll do fine. Just remember, they hired you for a reason." Those words stuck with me as I rode the elevator to the 47th floor, watching the city shrink below me through the glass walls. Pike Place Market looked like a toy set. The Space Needle seemed small enough to pick up and put in my pocket. From up here, the whole world looked manageable. The corporate development division occupied the entire northeast corner of the floor. with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Union and the distant Olympic Mountains. The open office space was designed with that modern tech company aesthetic: exposed brick walls, standing desks, a coffee station that looked like it belonged in a high-end cafe, and a conference room with a glass wall covered in financial projections written in colorful dry erase markers. But it was the corner office that caught my attention immediately. Through its glass walls, I could see a woman in her mid-40s with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was on the phone, gesturing with one manicured hand while the other held what looked like a crystal paperweight. Her office was easily 3 times the size of my entire apartment, with a view that encompassed both the Sound and the mountains. Diana Blackwell, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development, my new boss. I'd done extensive research on Diana during my interview process. Harvard Business School, class of 1998, 15 years at Goldman Sachs in New York, where she'd made partner by age 35. Recruited to Meridian in 2016 with a compensation package that industry websites estimated in the 7 figures. She'd led the acquisition of 3 major regional firms, deals worth over $2 billion combined. Financial Times had profiled her as one of the top 40 under 40 women in finance back in 2015. On paper, she was everything I aspired to become. A woman who'd shattered glass ceilings and built her own empire in a male-dominated industry. I'd imagined having mentoring conversations with her, learning from her experience, maybe even becoming her protege. Having a successful woman as my direct supervisor felt like a sign that I was finally on the right path. Looking back now, my optimism seems almost painfully naive. "You must be Rebecca Torres," said a voice behind me. I turned to find a tall man in his early 30s with sandy brown hair and a smile that seemed genuinely welcoming. He was wearing a navy suit that fit perfectly and carrying a coffee cup from the expensive cafe on the building's ground floor. "I'm James Mitchell, one of the senior analysts. Diana asked me to show you around and get you settled." He extended his hand, and his handshake was firm without being aggressive. "Welcome to the team." "Thank you," I said, hoping my relief didn't show too obviously. "I'm excited to be here." James gave me a tour of the office, introducing me to the other team members. There was Amanda Chen, a brilliant analyst who specialized in tech acquisitions and spoke 3 languages fluently. Kevin Rodriguez managed the financial modeling for healthcare deals and had an MBA from Wharton. Sarah Kim handled due diligence for retail acquisitions and had previously worked at McKinsey. Everyone seemed accomplished, driven, and surprisingly welcoming. "The team's really collaborative," James explained as we walked past a wall covered with deal tombstones, those lucite plaques that investment banks give out to commemorate successful transactions. "Diana runs a tight ship, but she's fair. She expects excellence, but she also invests in her people." I felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of environment I'd hoped for: high stakes, high performance, but with room to grow and learn. "Speaking of which," James continued, "Diana wants to meet with you in about 10 minutes. Just a quick introduction, nothing formal." He led me to a desk that had been set up in the main workspace area. It was positioned with a clear view of Diana's office, which I assumed was intentional. Junior staff should be visible and available. The desk was equipped with 2 large monitors, a high-end computer, and a stack of folders that I assumed were my first assignments. "Take a few minutes to get settled," James said. "I'll come get you when Diana's ready." I spent those few minutes organizing my small collection of personal items: a photo of my parents at their 25th wedding anniversary, a small succulent plant that had somehow survived my apartment's lack of natural light, and my lucky pen, a Mont Blanc knockoff that had gotten me through every important exam and interview. The desk felt enormous compared to the card table I'd been using as a workspace in my studio apartment. Through the glass wall of Diana's office, I could see her finishing up her phone call. She hung up, made a few notes on a legal pad, then looked out toward the main office area. Her eyes met mine for just a moment, and she gestured for James to bring me over. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, dreaming about. Working toward for years, James knocked on the office door. Frame, even though it was open. Diana, Rebecca's here. Send her in, Diana said without looking up from the papers on her desk. I walked into that corner office feeling like I was entering a temple. The space was immaculate, not a single paper out of place. Not a speck of dust on any surface. The furniture was all clean lines and expensive materials. A bookshelf held an impressive collection of business biographies and finance textbooks, along with several awards and pieces of crystal that caught the morning light. The view was even more spectacular from inside. I could see ferries crossing Elliott Bay like tiny white toys. Rebecca Torres, Diana said, finally looking up. She didn't stand or offer to shake hands. Sit. I took the chair across from her desk, a modern piece that looked stylish but wasn't particularly comfortable. Diana leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment that felt much longer than it probably was. University of Washington MBA, she said, reading from what I assumed was my resume. Graduated summa cum laude, prior experience at Peterson and Associates in Tacoma. She said the name of my previous company like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Small firm. Regional clients. Yes, ma'am, I said, though the ma'am felt wrong the moment it left my mouth. Too deferential, maybe. Or maybe not deferential. Enough. Tell me, Rebecca, Diana continued, setting down the paper and fixing me with a stare that felt like it could see through walls. What makes you think you're ready for this level of work? The question caught me off guard. During the interview process, we'd covered my qualifications extensively. I'd assumed that conversation was behind us. Well, I began. Trying to project confidence, my experience at Peterson gave me solid fundamentals in financial analysis and client relations. My MBA coursework focused heavily on corporate finance and strategic planning, and I've spent the last 2 years specifically preparing for a role like this by Peterson and Associates. Diana interrupted. They handle what? Strip mall acquisitions. Restaurant franchises, the kind of deals we'd use as warm-up exercises for our interns. Her tone wasn't overtly hostile, but there was something dismissive about it that made my stomach clench. They're a smaller firm, yes, but the analytical skills transfer directly to, do they? Diana leaned forward slightly. Because the deals we handle here are worth more than Peterson's entire annual revenue. The clients we serve don't have time for learning curves or trial-and-error approaches. They expect expertise, sophistication, and results. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but tried to keep my voice steady. I understand the scale is different, but I'm confident in my ability to adapt quickly and confidence, Diana said, as if the word itself was amusing. That's admirable. But confidence without experience is just wishful thinking. The office fell silent except for the barely audible hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. I could feel my carefully prepared first-day confidence starting to crack around the edges. Then Diana stood up, walked around her desk, and perched on the edge directly in front of me. The move felt deliberate, designed to establish physical dominance in the space. Let me be very clear about something, Rebecca, she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. This isn't some regional firm where you can charm your way through meetings with folksy stories and small-town work ethic. This is Meridian Financial. We handle billion-dollar deals with Fortune 500 companies. Our clients include some of the most powerful people in the world. She paused, letting those words sink in. Women like you don't belong here. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were shouted or delivered with obvious malice, but because of how calmly and matter-of-factly she said them. Like she was commenting on the weather or stating an obvious mathematical equation. I'm sorry, I managed to say, though. My voice came out smaller than I intended. You heard me correctly, Diana said, returning to her chair. Women like you from small towns, small schools, small firms, you don't belong in an environment like this. You don't have the background, the connections, or frankly, the sophistication required for this level of work. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't constructive criticism or tough love. This was something else entirely. I don't understand, I said, fighting to keep my composure. If you felt that way, why was I hired, Diana? picked up her pen and began making notes on a legal pad, a clear signal that this conversation was nearing its end. Sometimes HR makes decisions that the actual department heads have to live with. Sometimes diversity initiatives override practical considerations. Sometimes people interview better than they perform. She looked up at me with what might have been pity. I'm sure you're a perfectly adequate analyst for the right environment. This just isn't it. I somehow made it back to my desk without my legs giving out, though I honestly don't remember walking. The entire office seemed to have taken on a different quality. The bright morning light now felt harsh and exposing. The bustling energy around me felt exclusive rather than welcoming. I sat down in my chair and stared at my computer screen, seeing nothing. "How'd it go?" James asked, appearing at my desk with what looked like genuine concern. I opened my mouth to respond but realized I had no idea what to say. "How do you explain that your new boss just told you that you don't belong in your own job? How do you process being dismissed so completely based on factors that had nothing to do with your actual abilities?" "Fine," I finally managed, "just getting oriented." James studied my face for a moment. He clearly knew something was wrong, but he was too polite to push. "Well, if you need anything, just ask. We've all been where you are." I doubted that very much. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of administrative tasks and orientation materials, HR paperwork, IT setup, benefits enrollment, fire safety presentations. Through it all, I could feel Diana's words echoing in my head. Women like, "You don't belong here." What exactly did that mean? Women from small towns, women who worked their way up instead of starting with advantages. Women who didn't have Ivy League degrees or family connections, women who bought their suits at Nordstrom instead of having them custom-made by lunchtime. I'd convinced myself that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Diana was just testing me, seeing how I'd react to pressure. Maybe this was some kind of hazing ritual that everyone went through. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. But when I walked past her office on my way to the break room, I caught sight of her on another phone call. She was laughing at something the person on the other end had said, her entire demeanor relaxed and animated. Whatever warmth and charm she was capable of, it apparently wasn't being wasted on me. That afternoon, James gave me my first assignment, a preliminary analysis of a potential acquisition target in the manufacturing sector. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been preparing for. And despite the morning's emotional devastation, I threw myself into it with desperate intensity. This was my chance to prove Diana wrong, to show that I absolutely did belong here. I stayed until nearly 9 o'clock that night, long after most of the office had emptied out. I cross-referenced financial statements, built comprehensive models, researched industry trends, and prepared a presentation that I was genuinely proud of. It was thorough, insightful, and professionally formatted. It was the kind of work that would have impressed anyone at Peterson and Associates. The next morning, I arrived early and left the analysis on James's desk with a note explaining my findings and recommendations. Then I waited. Around noon, James stopped by my desk. "Rebecca, could you come with me? Diana wants to see your work." My heart started racing. This was it, my chance to prove myself. Diana's office looked exactly the same as it had the day before, but somehow felt even more intimidating. She had my analysis open on her desk, and I could see red ink marks scattered across several pages. "Sit," she said without looking up. I sat and waited while she finished reading, occasionally making additional notes in the margins. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, she looked up. "This is exactly what I expected." I waited for her to continue, hoping those words were leading somewhere positive. "It's competent," she said, in a tone that made competent sound like an insult. "Basic analysis, obvious conclusions, pedestrian presentation. The kind of work we might expect from a first-year associate at a mid-tier firm." She flipped through the pages, pointing out various sections. "Your industry analysis is surface level. Your financial projections don't account for several key risk factors. Your presentation format is adequate but uninspired." Each criticism felt like a small knife wound. I'd put everything I had into that analysis, More importantly, Diana continued, you've completely missed the strategic implications of this acquisition. You've focused on the obvious financial metrics without understanding the broader market dynamics or the client's actual objectives. She closed the folder and slid it across the desk toward me. This is what I mean about sophistication. It's not just about running numbers through a spreadsheet. It's about understanding the complex relationships between market forces, competitive positioning, and strategic vision. It's about seeing the forest, not just the trees. I stared down at my work, covered in red ink like a failed exam. Could you help me understand what I missed? I want to learn from this. Diana's expression didn't change. Rebecca. Some things can't be taught. They have to be developed over years of exposure to high-level strategic thinking. You can't shortcut that kind of sophistication. She turned back to her computer screen, a clear dismissal. James will give you some more basic assignments. Try to focus on accuracy rather than analysis for now. Over the following weeks, a clear pattern emerged. While other junior staff members were given substantial projects and included in client meetings, I was assigned what could only be described as busy work: data entry, filing, organizing documents that had already been organized. When I did receive analytical assignments, they were invariably deemed inadequate, regardless of how much effort I put into them. The feedback was always the same: too basic, missing strategic insight, lacking sophistication. But when I asked for specific guidance on how to improve, Diana would simply say that the kind of strategic thinking required couldn't be taught in a few weeks. Meanwhile, I watched as other team members flourished. Amanda was invited to lead a presentation to a major client. Kevin was given primary responsibility for analyzing a complex cross-border transaction. Sarah was included in high-level strategy meetings that I wasn't even told about. The exclusion was systematic and deliberate. When the team went to lunch, I somehow never got the invitation. When there were after-work drinks to celebrate closing a deal, I'd hear about it the next day through casual conversation. When Diana held informal mentoring sessions with junior staff in her office, my name was conspicuously absent from the invitation list. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I really wasn't sophisticated enough for this environment. Maybe my background really had left me unprepared for this level of work. Maybe I needed to study harder, work longer hours, somehow transform myself into the kind of person who belonged here. I stayed late every night, studying financial models and strategic frameworks. I read every business publication I could get my hands on. I took online courses in advanced analytics and strategic planning. I practiced presentation skills in front of my bathroom mirror until I could deliver complex analyses with confidence and poise. None of it mattered. One particularly demoralizing incident occurred about 6 weeks into my tenure. The team was preparing for a major presentation to a potential client, a tech company looking to acquire a smaller competitor. Everyone had been assigned different components of the analysis, and I'd been given what seemed like a substantial piece: evaluating the target company's intellectual property portfolio. I spent 2 weeks on that analysis, working nights and weekends to ensure it was comprehensive and insightful. I researched patent databases, analyzed competitive landscapes, consulted with IP attorneys, and built detailed valuation models. The final product was 43 pages of thorough, well-researched analysis that I was genuinely proud of. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. On Wednesday afternoon, James stopped by my desk with an apologetic expression. "Rebecca, there's been a change of plans. Diana decided to handle the IP analysis internally. She wants you to focus on formatting the other team members' sections instead." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Formatting? What about the analysis I've been working on? "I'm sure she'll incorporate some of your research," James said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. She just felt like the client needed a more experienced perspective on the IP component. That night, I stayed late and watched through Diana's office window as she worked on what was clearly my analysis. She was reorganizing my sections, rewriting my conclusions, and reformatting my charts. By the time she was finished, it was still fundamentally my work, but it would bear her name. The presentation went brilliantly. The client was impressed, particularly with the IP analysis. Diana received praise for her sophisticated understanding of intellectual property valuation. I sat in the back of the conference room, watching her accept credit for weeks of my labor. After the meeting, as the team celebrated in the break room, Amanda approached me with a concerned expression. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "You seem, I don't know, frustrated lately." I wanted desperately to confide in someone, but I also knew that complaining about the boss to a colleague was career suicide. "Just trying to find my footing," I said. Amanda nodded. But I could tell she wasn't convinced. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. This place can be tough, but it gets better." I appreciated her kindness, but I was beginning to wonder if that was true. Maybe this was just how things worked at this level. Maybe I really was out of my depth. It was around this time that I started noticing other things, small details that individually seemed insignificant, but together painted a disturbing picture. Diana's treatment of me wasn't just professional disappointment. It was something more personal and more cruel. She would hold team meetings and ask everyone for input except me. She would assign me projects with impossible deadlines, then express disappointment when the work wasn't perfect. She would make comments about maintaining standards and preserving the firm's reputation in ways that seemed directed at me specifically, but the most insidious part was how subtle it all was. To an outside observer, Diana might have seemed like a demanding but fair boss. The exclusions could be explained as performance-based. The assignments could be seen as appropriate for someone at my level. The feedback could be interpreted as constructive criticism. It was death by 1,000 small cuts, each one individually deniable but collectively devastating. By the end of my second month, I was seriously considering quitting. I'd start each day with determination and end it feeling defeated. My confidence, which had taken years to build, was crumbling day by day. I began to question everything I thought I knew about my own abilities. That's when I started paying closer attention to Diana herself. If I was going to survive in this environment, I needed to understand what I was dealing with, and what I discovered would eventually change everything. But first, I had to decide whether I was going to fight or flee, and that decision would define not just my career, but who I was going to become as a person. 3 months into my nightmare at Meridian Financial, I made a choice that would change everything. Instead of quitting like Diana clearly wanted, I decided to study her. If I was going to survive, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. It started small. I began arriving earlier and staying later, not just to work on my assignments, but to observe patterns. Diana's schedule, her meetings, her phone calls, her interactions with different people. What I discovered was fascinating and disturbing. With senior executives and major clients, Diana was charming, brilliant, and completely professional. She could discuss complex financial strategies with impressive depth and had an encyclopedic knowledge of market trends. She commanded respect and got results. But with subordinates, especially women, there was a different pattern. I watched her interactions with Sarah Kim, our retail specialist. Diana would assign Sarah projects, then critique her work in ways that seemed designed to undermine confidence rather than improve performance. With Amanda Chen, she was subtly dismissive of opinions, often interrupting or redirecting conversations away from Amanda's expertise. The most revealing moment came during a late evening when I thought the office was empty. I was finishing up some analysis when I heard Diana's voice from her office. She was on a phone call, speaking more loudly than usual. "The Torres girl is exactly what I expected," she was saying. "Small town mentality, limited perspective. She'll wash out within 6 months, and then we can hire someone more suitable." I froze at my desk, barely breathing. "No, I'm not concerned about HR," Diana continued. "Everything I'm doing is perfectly defensible. Poor performance reviews, inappropriate skill level, cultural fit issues. It's all documented." My hands were shaking as I quietly gathered my things. This wasn't about my qualifications or performance. This was deliberate sabotage, carefully planned and systematically executed. Diana wasn't just dismissing me, she was actively working to destroy my career. That night, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I wasn't going to be her victim.